We've got Peter Schiff, the CEO at Euro Pacific Capital, who's joining us live from Connecticut. Dodge Dorland, Chairman and Chief Investment Officer at Landor and West Capital Managers, live from New York. And Rebecca Sheehan, Lecturer at the University of Sydney. Welcome to you all. It's great to have you with us today. I want to kick things off with Peter, with you, because of course when you look at what we saw in terms of the market tumble and the nervousness that's around out there on the markets, as Bernie said, the attention straight back into the fiscal cliff, you really got to say that there's no real change in dynamic when it comes to Congress, status quo, so we do have something to be worried about.
Well, first of all, it's not the fiscal cliff that's the problem, it's the debt and the currency crisis and sovereign debt crisis that we're going to have. The fiscal cliff isn't a problem. The fact is the spending cuts are much too small to actually do something about the debt. The real problem is not going over this tiny cliff, but that Congress chickens out. We don't get the small spending cuts. We don't get the tax increases. Instead, we get bigger deficits, and then we go over the real fiscal cliff when the world won't loan us money anymore and interest rates skyrocket and the dollar tanks.
Well, that's certainly a concern if in fact that does happen. Peter, I'm not sure that everyone out there would agree with you that this is a tiny fiscal cliff, would you?
No, I think everyone acknowledges, and that's part of the reason the markets have crashed after the election yesterday.
So how concerned are you, from your perspective, about the fiscal cliff and what it's going to do to the dynamics in America?
Look, I just really hope that the two sides, Democrats and Republicans, will be able to work together, and certainly in statements made after Obama's election yesterday, it seems like the tones are much more conciliatory than they were after the midterms, say, or throughout Obama's presidency, in fact. So I think there's certainly agreement that people know they need to do something to act, because people are very concerned.
Let me bring Dodge Dorland into the conversation from Landor and West Capital Managers. Good to see you, Peter. Good to see you, Rebecca, and good to see you, Dodge. It's Bernie in Hong Kong joining the convo here. Dodge, do you think it's a tiny fiscal cliff, as Peter says there? I mean, the markets seem to think it's a big, big deal. But the fact is January 1 is going to come and go. We're going to get on with the business of life. I mean, the markets are taking it as Armageddon almost. And after you answer that, I want you and Peter to talk a little bit about this.
Well, relative to the potential size, it could be rather small. It could have been. But since we have a divided Congress and we have a relatively narrow margin in the popular vote, it's going to really reduce the ability to maneuver around the cliff, and so it becomes larger than it should have been had we had a more definite winning across, not only in Congress as well as the president, everybody on the one side. We don't have that, and so the cliff becomes much larger because the negotiations so far, what we're seeing is both sides are saying the right things, but the proof has to come in the actual maneuvering and the politicizing and the debating and the compromise. We have to see a compromise. We haven't seen that for 4 years, and so it remains to be seen whether both sides can do that. That is going to determine the size of the cliff and also whether it can be challenged and covered by January. We suspect it won't be. It'll probably be the end of January to early February before we get some kind of resolution.
Okay, so you in many ways concur with what Peter is saying there. Peter, you know, Boehner, the media went nuts when Boehner said, you know, we'll work with the Obama administration and, you know, we can do things in terms of enhancing revenues and all that. We can find common ground. But, I mean, he's sticking to his old mantra, no tax increases. So it tells me that this is just talk, and talk is cheap.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think the only compromise we're going to get is on more government and more spending and bigger deficits. Nobody in Washington is going to do anything about this problem until there is a real crisis. What we're seeing now in the markets is not a crisis. When the dollar is plunging, right, and consumer prices are surging, right, and the bond market is collapsing, that's when Congress might get together and do something. But until then, they're going to postpone the pain at any cost because they're worried about the politics. And they don't want to tell anybody that they can't get a check, and they don't want to tell the middle class that they're going to have to pay higher taxes. So they're all going to lie, and they're all going to play politics. And all this talk about gridlock isn't the problem. You know, the problem is Congress is spending and regulating and printing and taxing too much. If we had more gridlock, maybe we wouldn't be in this problem.
That's an interesting comment, Peter. I just want to follow up on that. How can you say that Congress well, gridlock rather in Congress is not the problem when clearly decisions that need to be made on the fiscal cliff, as Dodge said, could well come later January, later February because of this gridlock?
But remember, the fiscal cliff isn't the problem. It's part of the solution. The government is spending almost $4 trillion a year. It's only collecting about $2.5 trillion in taxes. We need to slash $1.5 trillion from the budget right now, not spread over 10 years. Right now, every year from now over the last 10 years, nobody is talking about doing what actually needs to be done. We're spending money as if we're still wealthy. We're broke. We have massive amounts of debt, and the only reason that this house of cards hasn't collapsed is because the Fed has interest rates at 0, and the world is dumb enough to lend us money under those terms. But when the world wakes up and realizes that we can't pay back any of the money that we've borrowed, that we're going to default or inflate, the party is going to come to an end.